Oh, show me your longsword, baby.
Oh, yeah. You like how sharp the point is, don't you?
I sure do.
Mm-hmm.
Are you gonna roll?
I'm going to roll a D20 for perception. Yes,
Yeah, I
yes,
love
yes.
that D.
You know
Oh,
you love that D.
oh man, we are lit tonight. This is gonna be
We're
good.
stupid.
We're so stupid. We're live. We're live. Are you ready? Let's do
Yes.
this.
Let's do it.
It's time for Pop My Culture.
Woo. I love our new opening.
I love it.
You know, right?
Absolutely. What's
Hello,
up?
everyone.
Princess Sprinkles.
Sprinkles. Princess Sprinkles is here for a very special occasion. She's kind of disappearing into the background. Come here, Princess Sprinkles. Hi, we're here. Welcome to Pop My Culture. Although today we're definitely gonna have our culture popped because you and I are still, well, definitely you for sure, definitely a beginner of the D&D.
Man, you don't even know what I know about that D and
Oh,
D.
wait, what? Oh, I'm excited about this. I'm really excited about this. I cannot wait. We have a really, really wonderful guest. And not only is he a guest, he is also a member of Red 5. He is a member of the Red 5 Tavern. He is a dungeon master in the Red 5 Tavern. And he is here to talk to us about Dungeons and Dragons and the pop culture phenomenon that it is. And it is definitely had a comeback. So, Josh, you paying attention?
No. I mean,
Wow.
yes.
Fucking rude, man.
I was
Fucking rude.
I do what
Wow.
I do.
Thanks. Before I actually do bring Aaron in, just a really quick reminder that we are now on Apple Podcasts. So we will be dropping the audio of every single one of our live streams. So unfortunately, there are going to be some things that are visual that you won't be able to see on the podcast, obviously, because it's all about your ear holes. So come over to our YouTube channel and check out the live stream if you want to get some of the visuals.
If
So
you want
now,
to fill all the holes.
all the
Yes.
holes, all the
Yes.
holes. That's always our goal. Always our
Ear
goal is to
holes,
fill the
eye
holes,
holes, mouth holes,
buttholes.
every hole. Whatever
Yeah,
hole can take it.
yeah, it's
hmm
true. Yep.
We're here to give it.
Poor Aaron.
I know.
Let's bring him in.
Hey,
Hi,
everybody.
Hey,
Aaron. I saw
Aaron.
you laughing back there.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking you invited me onto the show, and you're like, "Come on, we're going to talk about D&D. It's a comeback story." And I'm like, "Comeback? That sounds hot." So I knew I had to be here.
I don't think it was come on the back. I mean,
Whoa.
sorry.
Oh,
What?
oh.
Whoa.
Okay, I
Whoa.
thought this was something else entirely. I might have to leave.
Whoa.
Whatever. It's
Wrong
fine.
show, honey.
We,
That's
we do what we do.
later.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Okay,
That's
okay.
later. Well, really quick before we get into it, let's give a quick shout out to the chat. But before the chat, let's give a quick shout out and a thank you to our patrons over at Patreon for supporting us. That's Kim and Scott of Used and Abused. We've got Steve Long of Rebel Rock Radio. We have our lovely cruise director, Lunar Girl. She is our Red 5 secretary. We have Thousandth Ghost. Thanks, Ghosty. Kristen Roscom. Duffman Dioramas. The Salacious Rum. Chip Getler, aka White Shadow. Captain Spaulding, and our newest patron, Hannah Long. Would you like to say who Hannah is, Josh?
She may or may not be related to me. It's fine. We'll keep it there.
Well, thank you, Hannah.
She's
We
Oh.
obligated by
really-
blood to
Wow,
sign
that's
up.
fucked
So,
up. I can't wait for her to hear this on the podcast. ass when she listens to it later. She's gonna kick your ass.
She's my lovely sister.
She knows where you live.
Thank you, Hannah. Love you.
Thank you, Hannah. We really appreciate it. I'll get some swag over to you so you can be a Patreon too. Just look for Pop My Culture. And if you subscribe for as little as $1, you get stickers. You get thank you. You get a shout out on the stream. Depending on what tier you get, you could probably get a keychain, magnet, all sorts of stuff. So check us out. But let's get to our chat room. We have Logical Spock, who was in here earlier. Also, it's his birthday today, so I'm assuming
Happy
that's why
birthday.
he's actually not here.
Hey, happy birthday.
So happy birthday, Logical. Thanks for stopping by earlier. We got Duffman, like I said, who's one of our patrons. We got Robot over here. I mean, Rolando. I'm sorry, not
It's
Robot.
Rolobot.
It's Rolobot. I don't know how he's everywhere. He's one of our mods. Absolutely love you. Here's our other lovely mod and cruise director and patron, Lunar Girl
The
of the
boss.
Sidebar Cantina, and also Kalisha of Red 5 Tavern, who unfortunately passed away last night on the game. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
We lost poor Kayleisha.
We got this motherfucker named Sith Care
that
Bear. Don't know who he
motherfucker.
is.
The fuck?
Who's that asshole?
Exactly. Thank you, Aaron.
Stupid.
Aaron's on here. We got Ubaldo, who's been
Hey,
another.
Ubaldo.
I said Saporto.
Saporno. What?
We got
AM Dubs.
Good. Hey guys, hi. Oh,
What's
guys, I
that?
love our crowd. We got Blue Sasquatch. He knows what's up.
Squatch
That D.
Watch. That D. Exactly. That D.
D&D.
In D.
This is gonna be the theme tonight. Here's Tina. Josh knows his way around the D.
I'm familiar with the D. like we say every week, Josh likes dick. What you gonna say? What you gonna do?
Tina is also another member of the Red 5 Tavern
Hey,
who plays on Fridays. So we got Nicole in the house.
Oh,
Nicole, and let's see who else. I think
So-
I got everybody. All right, I got everybody. Thank
You
you
got
so much,
everybody.
guys.
Good
This
job.
is so much fun. Aaron, thank you so much. I'm so glad that you were willing to
Yeah.
come on this shit
to
show.
sit through this. Yes, we appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thanks for having me.
So
Really
D&D,
appreciate it. Yes.
can you give us a little backstory, a little history? And yes, if you guys have noticed, my blue nail polish is fading into the background of the green screen. But can you give us a little,
Give us a little of D
give
and
us a
D's nuts.
little- Listen, if
Okay,
you need me
so-
to kick out Josh at any point, you just let me know. I'll kick him out.
Yeah.
The floor is yours, sir. Go
But no,
right
I mean
ahead.
this.
All
It's
right,
been
settle
around
down,
since the
settle down.
'70s. So tell
Yeah.
us about it. There's some history.
Yeah. Well, we were doing a little back and forth before the show because I wanted to know like what are we talking about? Like what should I prepare for this? Because I'm not like a historian or anything, but I'm just fascinated by the history of things and how things came to be as they are today. And D&D has a really, really fascinating history. Just giving you the cliff notes of it. It started in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin with Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax. They were both kind of hobbyists within the wargaming hobby, which is basically you got like armies of dudes on each side. You think of it like Warhammer 40K, but it's mostly like recreating the Napoleonic Wars. And Gary Gygax, he got this idea to be like, well, what if you, instead of controlling like a whole army of dudes, you're just controlling like one dude? And if it's one dude, then that dude needs a name and a backstory and everything else. And he started to put together these rules that he eventually called Dungeons and Dragons. And basically he'd test these rules with his friends, and his friends were huge like Tolkien nerds. And this kind of rubbed Gary Gygax the wrong way because he was more like Michael Moorcock and Conan, like that kind of fantasy nerd.
Okay.
Yeah, so he like halflings, as they're called today, were originally hobbits in the game, and he really like didn't want to put those in because he thought that was like silly kid stuff, and he did not like Tolkien fantasy at all. But he eventually relented because, like, you know, peer pressure from your friends. It's the 70s. What are you gonna do? So he's like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And he originally started Dungeons and Dragons as like a side supplement to this war game that he was putting together where you would control individual people, and the magic stuff was all like an expansion pack on the side. It was never meant to be the full game. But then that started to get popular with other wargaming hobbyists, and so he decided to develop it into a full rule set. And it kind of took off from there. He got enough money that he was able to start this company called TSR, and that they kind of developed Dungeons and Dragons into what we know it today. So starting in like 1974 through the 80s is we get the original kind of 3 brown booklets of D&D that got revised into Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And then eventually we got like 3rd edition, and that was revised to 3.5. That's in like the late 90s, early 2000s. But before we get to there, we have this whole like satanic panic.
Yep.
I wasn't alive for it. Maybe some of our audience members were, but for those who don't know, there was this whole like everybody was freaking out about Satanism, and that itself is really fascinating. I'll only touch on it, but I have like an amateur interest in like religious extremism and cults and stuff like that, so this is on my radar.
Sounds fascinating.
The satanic panic started with this preschool where there were allegations of, I don't know if I could say it on the show without YouTube or whatever coming down on you, but adults doing very not nice things to kids. And the stories coming out of it were really bizarre. They were stories of like abduction into like secret tunnels underneath the school, and like witches and demons and these like elaborate like cult rituals and sacrifices, just bizarre stuff. And none of it was ever true. There's no evidence that any of it was actually real. It was bad interview techniques conducted by the law enforcement community to in dealing with these kids. It was basically like planting suggestions and memories into them just by the way that they asked questions. And that kind of started off the whole moral panic around Satanism, where people that covered the news and like mass media for a couple of years, because this was like a 3-year-long trial. And it kind of took over the public imagination as far as like moral panic. So people were like looking for Satanism everywhere, and wherever they looked, they found it. It was rock music with like backmasked lyrics. And one of the kind of primary targets of this moral panic was D&D, because D&D as a fantasy game, it has magic in it. It has things that kind of sound evil because you need evil bad guys to fight. Right. And this became a huge target with the moral majority, which was kind of like coming into fruition at that time as a major voting bloc. So particularly among like evangelical Christians, it became seen as this like really like, I don't know what the right word is, but like antisocial kind of like aberrant behavior, deviant behavior is the word I'm looking for. Yeah. And because like D&D was just starting to like go from really niche nerd thing to more like widely accepted nerd thing.
Yeah, like
it wasn't yet mainstream, but it was popular enough that like, you know, Grandma Ruthie probably heard about it somewhere, you know? And so it basically became this target, and I believe Gary Gygax had to like go to court and kind of like give like a testimony about it. Oh and God. He's like, it's complete nonsense, because it was. Yeah. There's no like mind control nonsense going on with D&D. It's people coming together around a table to basically tell a story together, and there's a structure of rules to kind of guide that play.
Yeah.
Right.
That's really all it is. It just happens to be about fantasy, but it could be about anything.
Right.
And but it's also really hard to communicate that to people, because tabletop gaming is such a weird hobby. And weird by I mean it's not really something that you can understand unless you've experienced it yourself. And it's really hard to communicate that to people when most of the m- most of the hobby's life cycle, D&D in particular, the rule books are written in a way that they're not trying to teach you the game by reading the rules. It basically assumes that someone else that you know has played the game and they're going to show you how it's played.
Interesting.
And it's very much mouth to mouth how you learnt this thing. So all that to say, during the Satanic Panic, there's a lot of talk and buzz about like what D&D is about, and a lot of fear going around about what it might mean and what's involved in it, but not a lot of actual like firsthand knowledge about what it is.
Right.
And then you also have to mix this in with nerd culture at the time, which people don't realize that like in the 80s, like if you were caught with a D&D rule book at school, like you would be physically beaten by people.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah.
it's cool to be a nerd now, but back
sure,
then
but
it
not
absolutely
then.
was not.
No.
No.
And really not even that far back, because I know I
No.
wasn't truly accepted in the 90s in school.
It
Yeah.
definitely was not
it
cool
really
when I
doesn't-
was growing up.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it really started to change like in the later 2000s, maybe earlier, but
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's
Between
so yeah,
that
you
and
go
Ozzy
from
Osbourne biting heads off bats and stuff, people were freaking
Yeah.
out.
yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of reasons for them to be freaking out that I would love to get into, but that's not what we're talking about today.
Nah.
So you go from the 70s, you have this really niche kind of wargaming spin-off that ends up being D&D. It goes through a couple of different iterations and starts to get really popular into and through the 80s. And then by the 90s, it gets on some pretty precarious ground. TSR, the company that Gary Gygax started to basically run D&D, basically got like too big to wield, and it started to take some like financial risks that it couldn't really afford to do so.
Yeah.
Most famous of which is the publishing of Unearthed Arcana, which is basically a bunch of like DM advice, but also like alternate rules that you could use. And it was basically sold as this like hugely valuable thing, but it was printed like as cheaply as possible. People's books were like falling apart within like weeks of getting them. It was not good. It didn't sell well, but they were banking on it selling well in order to pay off their debt. And so TSR basically went under. They ended up selling to Wizards of the Coast, which is the current owner of the D&D brand. And in the early 2000s is when they kind of finished off the 3.5 edition of the rules, and they switched to 4th edition. Around this time is also when they developed something called the OGL, the Open Gaming License. This is basically, so someone got the bright idea to say, hey, we have all these rules for D&D, and then we have all this content that we made for it, adventures, source books, optional rules, stuff that you can plug into it. What if we just take the rules in like bare bones form and we treat it like open software, like Linux or something like that? And we say, hey, anyone can use this for free, as long as they credit us and they use it in this way and blah, 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 a bunch of legalese. And they bought it. Wizards of the Coast like accepted it, and they put out the basic version of the rules for free that anybody could use as long as they like abide by these certain rules. They could use those rules to develop their own content for D&D, and they would be able to sell it, profit off of it, etc. And it was kind of treated as like an open platform. And that's really kind of the first key piece to take D&D from this weird niche thing to this kind of more mainstream thing.
Right.
Because once you have the basic rules and people know that they can develop content for the system without getting sued, then all of a sudden all these small like little publishers are able to produce this kind of niche content that you wouldn't be able to get just from Wizards of the Coast, and people can buy it and use it in their game, and it's all going to be compatible. Right. So that's probably what I would put as kind of like step one of D&D becoming mainstream, this kind of open gaming license. And jumping forward a bit, there's a whole fracas about the open gaming license maybe like 6-7 months ago, because Wizards of the Coast was basically trying to get rid of it. And there's a huge community backlash, and they finally like relented on that. And not only did they make the open gaming license for 5th edition permanent, they also put it under Creative Commons, which is actually like way more permissive than the open gaming license was. So it's like basically forever, like the 5th edition version of the rules anybody can use in any way that they want, as long as they give credit back to Wizards of the Coast, which is huge. But that's an aside.
For someone who says he's not a historian,
Yeah, no historian at all. Yeah,
he really knows his stuff. But
No,
I'm glad you explained the edition thing, because I did notice, like when you first started with Red 5 Tavern, that you were asking about the editions and stuff, and there was conversations like going back and forth between you, Steve, and DJ, and I'm like, what in the fuck are they talking about? So I'm really glad that you explained all this, because I'm sure that there are people even in our chat that have never played before, just just like me and Tina, how Tina just said. So it's been really nice having, you and Charles as such wonderful dungeons masters to, teach us as we play. Like you did that yesterday in yesterday's game. I noticed like you took a time out from the gameplay for a second to kind of explain things. And even me, while I was editing clips for this show tonight, I was listening and I'm like, hey, I learned something. I was being really honest. I was not being facetious in the chat when I said that
I'm still learning.
Like, I was like, oh, that's great. I feel like it's something that you constantly
I'm sure you're constantly learning on it.
Yeah.
Now, I did have a question. Like Wizards of the Coast, they fathered Magic the Gathering, right? So, like,
correct. They own the rights for that.
Yeah. So how? I've heard that there's supposed to be some sort of they're kind of connecting Magic with D&D somehow. Like, is that a real thing, or am I making that up?
There's been small ways that they've done that. This is super nerd talk, so I'll keep it short.
Literally every time you guys are playing, I jump on and go, nerds.
One of the characters that I'm playing in a campaign is his species is called Kenra. It is like like an Egyptian Anubis kind of dogman thing. And I got that from this resource called Plane Shift. Plane Shift is one thing that Wizards of the Coast has published that basically is content for D&D that's using Magic the Gathering lore, character settings, etc.
Makes sense.
And there's a setting in Magic the Gathering called Amonkhet, which is like magical fantasy Egypt, and they worked out a bunch of different species and classes that you can use for your character. And so I picked from there and got this like cool character. So there's some kind of like cross-pollination between Magic the Gathering and D&D. I haven't heard of anything that they're planning to do beyond that, but yes, Wizards of the Coast is in charge of both of those brands.
So nuts.
So, you said
You're
earlier
knowledgeable.
the different.
Oh, you should be tooting your own horn
much.
right now, man. What the hell?
You said something earlier about the different editions of the rules. Did you want me to go over that, or?
No, I just like had no idea just how in depth it got with stuff like that in terms of the rules, and as someone like me who is still considered a novice, even a year later, just like you say, you're still learning. I'm definitely still learning. So I just didn't know that aspect of it. I knew the more, again, because we're pop culture nerds, I only know the pop culture aspect of D&D. So I did know about the satanic worship, and spoiler alert, it is a big I know Kelly hasn't gotten to the latest season of Stranger Things, which I kind of want to avoid talking about that, which is why I'm going to focus more on Big Bang Theory tonight, because I know Kelly has got her own show with Dawn about Stranger Things, but it is a big deal, but it's an even bigger deal. And they do talk about the witch hunt that goes on in the very last season of Stranger Things. So I was definitely aware of that aspect of it, but not the rest of it, and it's definitely had a resurgence, because I mean, I don't really remember it as a kid in the 90s. I definitely don't remember it being spoken about when I was in high school in the 2000s. but then Big Bang Theory kind of came along, and I feel like that's where I started to hear more and more about it. That's actually how it piqued my interest, was actually through watching
Okay.
Big Bang Theory. Yeah.
No shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
You're
yeah,
gonna see all
so
the clips. You're gonna love it.
I think I remember the first time it was ever popularized in my eyes was when I saw them playing it in ET.
yeah.
Oh,
You know, I mean,
Kelly's favorite movie.
Kelly's favorite movie, yes. But I thought that was
okay.
great that it was such a big part of that. You know, they were all adamant about finishing the
Yeah.
game, and it really kind of piqued my interest in the idea of playing.
And I
Yeah.
clearly love
So-
it.
Um, so I'm happy to explain the different editions. I'll keep it brief because there's a ton to say about it. But just backing up a little bit for those who are like still kind of like swimming about, like what is D&D and everything. There's tabletop RPGs or tabletop gaming, which is kind of the hobby of what we're describing,
Right.
where you sit around a table, usually, unless you're playing online, sitting around a table, virtual or otherwise, with your friends, and you are telling a story in a consistent world, and there are usually rules and especially dice rolls to kind of determine how events play out within that kind of shared imaginary world.
Right.
Usually you have players who control the actions of individual characters, and then you have one player who is usually like the game master or dungeon master. Dungeon master is a trademarked term by Wizards of the Coast, so pretty much every other game system will call it a game master or something.
Oh.
Anyway,
No, it's good to know.
so you'll have one player who's kind of like sets the stage and plays all the other characters that the players interact with, and then so that's tabletop gaming, and then D&D is a specific game in that genre with its own rules, and normally D&D is far and away the most popular tabletop game, and most people who get into tabletop gaming as a hobby start with D&D.
That makes sense.
That's why it's important to talk about the history of D&D and how it's gotten so popular today, because it is usually the first thing people touch when they get into tabletop gaming. What's weird about D&D is that it is probably the most complex tabletop game when it comes to the rules. And it didn't always used to be this way. In the first edition of the rules, you have 3 little brown booklets. There may be like 100 or 150 pages total, which is really not that much. It's still very expensive back then, but the rules were relatively simple. You could make a new character in like 5-10 minutes, something like that. It's very bare bones, but this is kind of Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, like their very first like baby steps into making this an actual thing. Then you get Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which is usually called that or second edition. And they just kind of like build out the rules a little bit more. They polish it up a bit more. This is when TSR is actually a company and they're trying to take themselves seriously. And it's called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons because it's an advanced version of the first rules, not that it's like a harder version of the core rules, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But what's a little confusing is that later they put out Basic Dungeons and Dragons, which was like a simplified rule set for like new players. Second edition, they expand everything and make it a bit more coherent. They add some new classes and species. Like I think second edition is when they changed hobbits to halflings because otherwise they would get sued by Tolkien. And there's actually a supplementary book for the first game that had like different statistics for all the gods that you could fight, and a lot of them were like actually trademarked like gods. Like you could fight Godzilla, you could fight Thor, and so they basically like put that out because they thought nobody would notice, but people did notice, and so they had to cut that book out. But yeah, this is when you get like the rogue class first shows up, although it was called a thief at that time. And so a lot of the kind of basic building blocks of the game are starting to come together. Third edition is they really wanted to expand the rules here, and it's probably the most like robust version of the rules for Dungeons and Dragons. To give you an example, let's say I want to grapple somebody. So we're fighting, and I just want to like put them in a headlock, or otherwise just like restrict their movement by grabbing onto them. How does that play out? In 5th edition rules, I make a athletics I make an athletics check to try to grab them, and the other person, they make an athletics or acrobatics check to see if they can get out of it, and whoever has the greater roll wins, and they either escape the grapple or are grappled. And explaining that is like 3 paragraphs at most, like 2 paragraphs, something like that. For 3rd edition, those rules are like almost a full page. It's like
so intricate.
It's very wordy. It's very robust. As you go from top to bottom and work your way down, like every step makes sense. And it's like, okay, that's how we do it. But when you're actually playing the game, nobody ends up grappling anybody else because it's just so much, it's so dense to work through that nobody ends up doing it. That's what I mean by really robust. Like it's very thorough in everything. And some people really like that, but it's also really restricting because it's like, oh, you want to do this? Well, let me look up and see if there's actually rules for it. Oh, yes, there is. Now let's go down like a whole page of stuff to figure out if it works or not. Right. And that was the approach at the time.
If anyone here has watched Parks and Rec 1,000 times like I have a new appreciation for Ben Wyatt and inventing the cones of Dunshire, which is definitely feels like it's very similar. And when they get later into this, the series, he talks about, that he made like another edition because it got, patented and all that and put into production. And the second part of his Cones of Dunshire game is called like rated like one of the most difficult and most complex games like ever played. So it definitely reminds me of D&D when he starts explaining the rules. I'm with Leslie. I'm like, what the fuck did Ben Wyatt just say?
That's my biggest issue with D&D is that I feel like it's completely open.
Yeah.
And you can do kind of whatever you want, but at the same time, it's within such complex parameters in the process that it's just almost impossible to kind of get your mind around to a certain extent.
But it's awesome. It's really a lot of fun. I had some preconceived notions about it myself. I mean, even I, unfortunately, am guilty of being one of those people that was like, D&D, like that's the ultimate of nerddom. You know what I mean? And I just never felt like maybe it was also just my self-esteem. But I think it was also my self-esteem.
Don't take that away.
Shut up. I also think it just felt like, oh my God, am I like too stupid to play D&D? But now actually having played now actually having played it, I'm like, God, I made this to be so much more in my head. That's not to say it's still not an intricate game to play, but you really do have to kind of like free your mind when it comes to D&D.
Yes. And at this point, we're getting to the point where D&D starts to become more popular and mainstream. Yeah. Early to mid 2000s, I can't remember the exact year, 4th edition of D&D comes out. That version basically saw how like robust and wordy 3rd edition had come, and they were like, we're going to do something different. And they really tried to simplify it down. And 4th edition it's kind of hard to describe, but it's kind of similar to how like MMOs work, where every player has different abilities they can do. And one of the things they wanted to address was like wizards had started to become really, really powerful in the game, where at lower levels as a character, you're super weak, and you could, as a wizard, you could die in like 2 hits. And it's a lot of hard work to kind of for everybody else to kind of protect you. But once you get to a high enough level, you're like bending space and time and just doing all this crazy stuff that like nobody else can do. And that's the trade-off. Well, that that means that especially at like higher levels of play, wizards and like a fighter are going to be very mismatched with what they can do. Imagine like Aragorn trying to keep up with Gandalf. It's just not the same. So, what fourth edition tried to do was bring that back into balance, where a high level fighter can feel like they're doing crazy stuff, like an anime character that wizards can do.
Yeah.
And the way that they did that is everybody gets different abilities that they use on their turn, and those abilities can look like different things, but ultimately they're matched with each other level for level, and it actually worked. This was right when like computers in the home were becoming more common. Internet in the home, especially, was taking off, and the whole idea was that fourth edition would ship with this virtual tabletop that would allow people to play together over the internet. And
Right.
through
I've still
series
got
of
some 3x5 floppies of D&D games.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Through a series of tragic circumstances that I don't want to get into now, that ended up not going through. And so there wasn't that kind of last piece to really put it together. And so there's a lot of people, myself included, who really like fourth edition, but a lot of people who it just felt weird. It felt like not like the D&D that they knew and loved. And it kind of got a lot of backlash. And fast forward to 2014, that is when the fifth edition of the rules come out. And fifth edition really wanted to simplify things even further. So they came up with this core mechanic for resolving anything that you might do, where there's a certain number that you need to hit in order for it to be a success, that number or higher. And you roll usually a 20-sided die, and you add whatever modifiers might be relevant to the situation. And as long as you hit that target number or above, then it's a success. If you don't, then it's a failure. And that's kind of the core engine that drives the whole gameplay. And everything else is kind of details on top of that. They added advantage and disadvantage, which really simplified things, because third edition, you would have a bunch of numerical modifiers that you would add on to whatever you're trying to do. And it just became like an accounting spreadsheet to keep track of all the things that might apply. They were like, no, none of that. Either have advantage or disadvantage, or you don't. If you have advantage, you roll 2 20-sided die and pick the higher one. If you have disadvantage, you pick the lower one. And it's very streamlined, very easy. And the result is it's a lot easier for the game to get into, especially for new players. The downside is it puts a lot of work on the DM, because instead of like third edition, there's robust rules for everything. Fifth edition says, we're going to rely on rulings, not rules. We're going to give you enough rules so you can know how stuff mostly works. And if there's any edge cases, you, the DM, will be able to make a best educated guess on how it works. And we'll just go with that. And it just flows. And actually, it really works. There's a lot of people who have things to nitpick and criticize about fifth edition, including me. But I can't emphasize enough how streamlining and simplifying D&D is to getting it to this kind of mainstream acceptance that we have today. Did all of that make sense?
No, it did make sense. And
I go back and replay this.
I actually wanted to ask you, like, as a DM, I mean, first of all, you do a fantastic job, and I could not even imagine how difficult that is. And I guess I wanted to ask you, like, where is the inspiration for that? I mean, how much of that is purely out of your head? How much of that is based on pre-established D&D lore? Is there, I mean, I know there are guidebooks, but how much of that truly guides the story, or is that really completely on the DM? And if so, like, why is that fair that they make all the rules to make it easier for the player and not for the person that's behind the game itself?
You are asking precisely the right questions, and I'm so glad that you have done that.
Don't do that.
Of course I am.
Don't encourage him.
So
don't inflate his ego.
To back up, as a DM, there's basically two different ways that you can run a campaign. You can either run it from a campaign book, which is a pre-published campaign, or you can do something called homebrew it, which is basically you make up everything, the plot, the setting, the characters, etc. There are published campaign books that you could buy, the Waterdeep Heist, and it is a published book by Wizards of the Coast. You can buy it in a bookstore, get it, and presumably you could just read it starting on page 1, and it will guide you through this story that your players participate in, and how it actually plays out and what happens at the table is still kind of like up for grabs, but you have this framework to work in. They provide you the settings, the characters, and all the rest. And, if it works as intended, then you could just run it out of the book. There are a lot of DMs that do that, and there's like no shade to that because it's not less work. It's just a different kind of work to prepare and run that game. Then you have people like me who prefer to kind of make their own setting and their own rules, and that's a very different approach because you have your characters, you have whatever you've established already as far as the rules or the world and the setting and the characters, and you have to ask yourself, like, what happens next? What would make a good story? I really relish that because I like that freedom to be able to just kind of do whatever. It's also really terrifying because, like, there's some times where like I just can't come up with stuff. And that I think for any creative person that just happens sometimes. There's not really anything that can be done about it. As far as like, do you have any questions about that before I keep answering?
No,
I don't have a
I
question,
completely
but
get it.
no,
What?
no, 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 no. No,
What?
no, no.
No,
Did
we're
you
just gonna
kick me
keep
out?
going.
Did
No,
you
I
kick
didn't.
me out?
I may or may not
If you're
have
listening on the podcast, come watch the
exercised
channel.
the
This
power.
my co-host kicked me
Yeah,
out. How dare you? You
that's what
son
happens
of a
when you give
Unbelievable.
me
bitch.
access to the StreamYard. I'm just saying.
You son
Oh
of a
no.
bitch. Listen,
um, Go
what are you
ahead.
gonna ask?
No,
Because I worked very
I was
hard
going
on
to
these
ask something.
clips, and
I
we're
was going to
already at
ask
40
something
minutes.
relative to
I
the
know. I'm
actual
sorry. I thought this was going to be
No,
brief.
it's not you.
You're the
It's
one
not
that's
you.
complaining about me
He's the
kicking
one
you
asking
out.
questions.
Not that you
Yeah.
didn't deserve it, but it's whatever. So how much, like, I mean, when you do just kind of free ball it, so to speak, and make your own campaign, how detailed do you get? Like, do you try to think of every possible scenario from moment to moment in order to be prepared for whatever the player might do, or do you try to kind of wing it as you go on certain things?
When I first started as a DM, I really over prepared and I tried to think of like every possible outcome. And I had scenarios built up as far as like what would be a cool story. And what it ended up doing was I would basically kind of subconsciously guide players towards this like brilliant story that I've cooked up.
Yeah.
And what I had to learn was like, that's not why players come to the table. They come to the table because they want to play their characters and basically be the stars of this like television show that
Yeah,
all of you
they
are
wanna
writing
have
together at the same time.
ownership
Yeah.
of the story as well. Yeah, I get that for sure.
Yeah. So when I have my preconceived notions about what the story should be and try to guide the players into that, then at a certain point it becomes like controlling and not fun for the other players. Because like if I just wanted to tell a story where everything goes the way I wanted to, I could just write a book. Like,
Right.
and that's really not what tabletop RPG is about.
Yeah.
So when I do come up with scenarios, it's mostly nowadays I prepare a lot less. I might have like a page of notes, and it's mostly like, what do I think would be good encounters for the players to have? What would be interesting to happen? And I don't try to force it to happen. It's more like, this is a potential thing that might happen that might be a cool addition to the story. If the players never get to it, then whatever. But if they do, then great. And I've built up enough experience where if players go in a completely different direction or things happen that you don't expect, like Alicia getting killed, then I can just roll with it. And I have enough experience as a DM that I can kind of think on my feet and be able to have enough for the players to do that. It gives the illusion that I have everything kind of prepared and oh, you're participating in my world that I've concocted with my genius, but really it's not like that at all. It's like if you've watched enough movies, then when you watch a really uninspired, stereotypical, derivative movie, you could call out what's going to happen before it ever happens.
True.
It's kind of like that, where because I've played enough D&D, I can have a lot less preparation and still know like how to set a scene and introduce the conflict in the scene and guide the players through it, and then have the release of that tension, and that scene ends. I've gotten a lot better at that over time, but yeah, it does take experience to do. And just to kind of peel back the curtain a little bit, I had this whole segment planned from the last episode of Red 5 Tavern, where after the players fought this kind of like gigantic corrupted jellyfish, don't ask, there would basically be like this old shipwreck that had been trawled up from the kind of chaos that the jellyfish had caused and freshly beached onto the shore. And there would be like a treasure chest, and the players would get like a bunch of loot from it. But also there would be this whole kind of side quest where the players would investigate the ship, figure out that this kind of black oil ooze thing that's been corrupting the land has also corrupted the ship, but like 150 years ago. And like the ghost of the captain would be on there and would like try to get the players to help them find some goddamn peace and quiet for once. But then Kaylisha died, and I realized that's where we're ending it. Like all this other stuff, like inconsequential now. Like this is the most important thing, so we're gonna roll with that. So I hope that answers your question about.
So you give yourself a certain level of flexibility as you go. I can appreciate.
Yeah,
that.
I think it's essential. Some people are like really loosey goosey with prep, and they're just like, oh, I'll just make it up as we go, and they're really good at that. I'm not like. It's not good or bad to have to prep a lot or a little. It's just different styles for how to DM. But I will say, as I've gotten more experienced, I've learned to like let go, to unclench the butthole, as it were, and just let that story slide in.
Always good. Just relax, let it slide in. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Bear down a little bit.
Now, have you ever had one that got so far off the rails that you found it difficult to get back to where you were trying to take the story to begin with?
Luckily, no, but that's also playing at the table. I subscribe to the theory that when I'm a DM, it's not my game that you're playing, and I'm not here to dispense fun into your face. What's happening at the table, I believe, is everybody's responsibility, including the other players and including me. And part of that is kind of the social contract where the players understand that I've prepared the game, I've prepared an adventure for them to participate in, and they've shown up to play it. So if I put something in front of them, then I'm kind of expecting that they're going to go for it, and they trust me to provide a fun experience for them. And I trust them that if things go off the rails, that we're going to go along for the ride, and I'm not going to shut them out from that. Right. I've been lucky enough that so far it's not gone so far off the rails that I'm like, and I'm like completely preparing everything like out of my ass. Yeah. But if that were to happen, I would probably say something like,
your ass is prepared.
Okay. I'd be like, okay, cool. I have this whole continent of content prepared over here, and you want to go off to that little island? Okay, cool. We'll meet back in a week when I have that content prepared, and we'll call it early.
That asshole runs deep. I get that. Okay,
yeah. I am interested though in ChatGPT and how that has helped with preparation. I don't know if you're familiar with actually using it. but I use it as kind of a brainstorming device where I might have like a rough idea of what's going to happen, and if you use ChatGPT the right way, it can actually generate some pretty interesting ideas. Or probably more important, it will, at least the way I'm most creative when I'm reacting to something instead of just pulling something out of thin air.
Mhm.
So it will give me something to react to and be like, oh no, that's not what I want. No, not that, not that, not that. Oh, but what if I do that? So, for example, the whole jellyfish encounter. I knew that I wanted an encounter with this crazy encounter with like a giant creature that the players haven't fought yet. And I thought, well, they fought some creatures in the forest, and in the forest, and in the forest, and in the Shadow Realm. But what about like a sea creature? So using ChatGPT, I like ran through a bunch of different like giant sea creatures, and then I'm like, you know what? What about like a fucking jellyfish?
It was very inventive. It was
that
great.
sounded like really
Super creative.
wacky and and like instantly recognizable. Like, when is the next time that these players are ever going to fight a giant jellyfish? You know? So
Exactly.
and I just kind of ran with that and was able to work out a bunch of details along that. And I guess that gets back to your earlier question about inspiration. I pull from everywhere. I pull from TV shows, movies, books that I've read. In particular, this whole kind of like aquatic, this like dark nautical aquatic sea creature kind of theme.
Mhm.
I pulled from a album by Ween called The Mollusk, which is like very weird and kind of like psychedelic rock. But it I don't know. I music for me is a way for me to experience emotions that I don't know how to describe.
Mhm.
But I know that like when I listen to a song, I can be like, okay, I want to make an encounter that feels for the
Feels
players what this song makes me feel, if that makes
Right.
I
sense.
get that. No, absolutely. That's
So
great.
yeah, you pull inspiration from anywhere you can.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to show some of that, we do have the Red 5 Tavern, which is part of the Red 5 network. And this was something that was created by the co-host of Scare Scuttlebutt, which is Brad. But we've kind of made it a very collective thing now. And we've all kind of have taken control of it, with Aaron and Charles being our current DM. And Kelly, who is also a player, she likes to create these TikToks of certain certain funny moments within the game. So I kind of want to showcase the fun side, because again, there is, I think, that stigma that because it's so overly nerdy that, oh, how can you possibly have fun with something that is so intricate? But no, we find a way to make it work, as Kelly said earlier. You let Princess Sprinkles strip on a pole, damn it, during the game. So
I knew it would be this clip.
let's see.
And I very much enjoyed it. So
Let's take a look at some of these TikToks, shall we?
Sprinkles, where was that place that you took me again?
Ye old titty bar.
Ye old titty bar. And after only 2 rum punches, okay? Teeny, tiny, beautiful little Sprinkles whips off her clothes, hops up on stage, starts twerking in her tiny little top, and starts spinning around the stripper pole.
Dead ass.
Oh my god!
Look at that tiny little out there.
This is happening.
Like, one guy finally comes up and he threw like 2 coppers at her. Like, I think they were penny coppers. I start talking to the guy, and he just happens to be a bone cobbler, okay? Now,
A bone. That's what
bone
he told
cobbler.
you? A bone cobbler. Okay, that was the story.
Approximately 10 hours later.
and now we each have an awesome dagger.
All right.
And Sprinkles has recovered since from her hangover.
Oh, that's good.
Good thing it was 2 days, not 1 day, because that was Does anybody else have any other stories?
Good luck following that.
Thank the Lord. All right.
So one night, Daganra is out having a few drinks, and
he calls himself the bone cobbler.
We definitely had way too much fun.
I like food. This is why I keep my figure so well. And you know what else I can do? I love banana.
come on, that has to be a natural 20 on something. Wait, Charles, watch. You have to watch.
I bet you would like to see.
I can't. Oh my god.
And you are the cutest one I've seen. Well,
I'm going to go over to the guy next.
Let me just check to make sure my family's not watching this.
What's your order?
I'll take a large fry and
a French fry sounds really good right now.
I always do it. I always take a drink before I ask a question, and someone bursts me.
You guys want to have a little memorial service for him real quick?
For the coffee guy?
The innkeeper!
Yeah, please.
I got nothing going on.
Nestra, do you think you can tell your imp to look around the longhouse and find some candles?
Sure. I could do that.
I'm going to dress into something more appropriate for this occasion.
Okay. I'm going to use my druid craft to light those candles, and I'm going to take my my glamour weave. I'm going to lay it down on a table and kind of make it look like there's a body under it, because I don't know about you guys, but there is no way I can stand over a mound of caterpillar shit and pretend it's Park. So
I mean, I could, but you know, just for you.
You bitch.
I can't do it, guys. I can't memorialize a pile of crap.
It's okay, Kalisha. I dressed for the occasion in my little black dress.
Oh, Sprinkles.
I decided to wear an extra number 2. I did. I feel like I should honor Kark with this, you know, with these authentic, real leather pants I have on.
Oh.
I'm Kalisha, so I put on a black robe that resembles something that a nun would wear.
Kiki, we need to work on your style.
I'm fine, Vanessa.
I'm going to order a double chai latte.
Nice.
Who's going to get it for you, Fizfire?
Dead.
I mean, the service was bad here anyway.
You
bastard. Impressive.
Yeah.
Nice throw there.
Definitely is.
He's arrogant fuck. Sorry.
Humble. I like that.
And you get too humble, they might crumble, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
God. This is the worst flirting ever.
Agreed, Kelly.
I swear, if Kalisha walks in and you guys doing the nasty, I'm out.
Nice conversationalist. Can you go?
I'm a monk. I don't talk to people. It's my job.
Yeah, I can see that. Good Lord, this is why I stay in the fucking woods. Can you please go get... Can you please go get your quinoa blade and please get my dagger?
Kalisha, you're coming out of your meditation.
Okay.
And so you're in the room, but you don't know what's going on. But you obviously you had your plan, and so Sprinkles is right there, and yeah. So what do you at this point? What would you like to do?
Hey, Sprinkles, when did you get up here?
Shh, don't worry about it.
Oh my god!
Oh my god!
Okay.
Everything will be all right.
No, I can guarantee you it's not.
Sprinkles, why are there strawberry skins on my arms?
Again, don't worry about it.
All right.
So this woman sort of positions herself over Kira, and she begins this extremely complex incantation. And Trixus, you see this, and Jones. Let's see, what? 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Yes. It's a new personal record.
folks.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining the Red 5 Tavern. Have a good night.
Oh, that was sweet.
Oh my god.
Great stuff.
We have the best time. We really do. We have the greatest time playing it. And especially, streaming it, which I'm sure is a lot of fun for everybody.
Yeah. That's D&D. And that's another like key step for this becoming mainstream is with 5th edition coming out in 2014. That's also kind of when like Twitch started to take off. And you actually started to see people like actually stream them actually playing D&D. And it's so huge for this because like I said earlier, it's kind of hard to just describe D&D and like this is what tabletop gaming is, and almost to like really know what it is, you have to experience it for yourself. And the rise of streaming and people actually playing D&D and other like audience members being able to watch it is so huge for a more mainstream adoption of it, because people could actually like point to something and be like, oh yeah, that's playing D&D. That's something I want to do. And so you have these big streaming campaigns like with Dimension 20 and Critical Role. They start to kind of gain prominence during this time. So it's kind of this perfect storm of this simplified rule set that's easier for players to get into, plus streaming where people can actually watch D&D being played and be like, oh yeah, I want to be a part of that.
Right.
And that kind of brings us to the Red 5 Tavern. But of course, we also have like celebrities starting to play D&D and representation in more like mainstream pop culture. I don't know about either of those, so I'll leave it to you to teach us about that.
For me, I mean, again, I already knew what D&D was even before I started watching Big Bang Theory, but it really was Big Bang Theory that piqued my interest. And the only reason why is because, again, I had a very preconceived notion about what it was, how it was played, and I didn't know that there was such a creative freedom to it. So when I was watching it played, which this is probably one of my favorite clips, is, because you were talking about the creativity, and this also kind of shows also how sometimes the DM has to kind of think on their toes, and I really hope that YouTube doesn't stop the stream when I show this. So I think this is the correct one.
This is those kind of clips, huh? Okay.
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorite episodes of Big Bang Theory, which is funny because it is very D&D centric. Like almost the entire episode just takes place in the apartment and they're playing, which you can actually see right behind me. And basically the ladies of the show have never played before. but there's something that kind of happens that triggers them to have to play, and the DM kind of has to think on his toes. And of course, there's a movie element to it because I love my celebrities. So I just was like, oh, I didn't think that you could play D&D this way. And there was even an episode where they made it Christmas themed. So here's a clip just to show how creative you can actually get with D&D, and I hope that this is the one because I have so many loaded in here.
Right. Sheldon, to start our quest, you need to open this little Christmas gift I got.
A Christmas gift? You know I don't enjoy Christmas.
Would you just look inside?
Oh, a scroll. I like scrolls. They're my third favorite system of transmitting the written word, after stone tablets and skywriting. You have all been summoned to join a thrilling Dungeons and Dragons adventure. Your quest begins in a secret northern village of elves who have all been massacred. I like where this is headed. Your task is to rescue their leader from a dungeon of ogres. Oh, that's a saucy twist. That leader's name, Santa Claus. But no.
It's actually ho, 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 but you'll get the hang of it. You find yourselves in the smoking remains of Santa's village. Clearly, a great battle has taken place.
Oh man, the first monster I see, I'm gonna sneak up behind him, whip out my wand, and shoot my magic all over his ass. Do you hear yourself?
My
when
kind
you
of
say these
D&D.
things?
Yeah, there you go. That's for you, honey.
I follow the
Talk about a
ogre
comeback.
tracks, checking for secret doors along the way.
And
Shut up,
you
JV.
discover
Stop being a
secret
hater.
Door leading to a dark corridor.
Okay, guys, let's make a plan. Spellcasters in the back, warriors in the front.
Screw that noise. I'm going in. Hang on, Santa. I'm coming for you. Okay, you run into a room full of weapons, hit a tripwire. A cannon blows your face off. You die. You're out of the game.
Oh, Kelly knows how that feels.
Cannon? Am I really out
Oh,
of the game?
poor Kelly.
Lucky.
Come on, moving on.
Wait, doesn't anyone have a rod of resurrection? Because if you've got one, I need it bad. Get in here with your rod and give it to me.
Oh my god.
I think I cracked the code.
See, this is where I like how innovative this is and how intricate it can actually get.
The drawbridge is lowering.
My carpal tunnel's acting up. Play for the pain.
Hey, Ron.
Rummy.
You did it. The drawbridge is down. What's the big deal? Raj bailed so we could use some extra players.
I've just never played Dungeons and Dragons with girls before.
Oh, don't worry, sweetie. No one has.
Penny.
What do you say?
I'll leave it up to the dungeon master. A satanic fungus that looks suspiciously like Al Pacino rises from the forest floor and says, "You're playing D&D. You're playing D&D. This whole apartment is playing D&D." You find yourselves face to face with two hulking ogres. What are you doing in our...
This reminded me of you, Aaron. Believe it or- I heard that voice and I was like, oh my god.
Goes out, spreads his wings, and prepares to attack. Wait.
So yeah, like this is definitely some of the stuff that I really liked is how creative that the guys were able to get that, you know, Howard, which this is the character Howard, he's the one that is the DM for this game and he's decided to put his own spin on it. There's another clip where he does a voice as Nicolas Cage, he does a voice as Christopher Walken, and this is really the one that I was like, oh my god, I had no idea that you could get like this knee deep into it. And the way that the girls end up having to play is Raj's character, he ends up getting a call from his girlfriend and he decides that he'd rather go be with his girlfriend. And it's
Valid.
it's just Sheldon and Leonard playing, and you know, they're like, as you saw, he decided to do the Al Pacino voice, and they ended up playing, and it was just that's really what got me into it. So that kind of leads me to my
Yeah.
question of how did you get into D&D? What sparked your interest? Like, how did you end up deciding, oh, I want to play?
Yeah. It's an interesting story because like I grew up like conservative Christian, and I kind of took it at my parents' word that like D&D was evil.
Mm.
And didn't really want to like investigate it for myself at the time. But I had a friend who I'm still friends with today, good old Maxwell Havlick, who in high school he was a DM. He was running D&D games, and he would explain to me like in story form of like what was happening in the campaigns that he was running, and I thought it was really neat. But there was this kind of like self-imposed barrier that I had where I'm like, you know, I can appreciate the stories, but I can't get like involved further. And then fast forward several years later, around like 2017, I want to say, I had grown up and matured a lot into a different person, thank God. And
we're relieved too. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Through
still aren't
like through like friends that I had and like different experiences that I had, came to understand D&D and tabletop games in a much different light. And kind of my first entry into that was actually Star Wars. I was going to college, and one of my friends at the time, he was DMing a Star Wars game, and it sounded pretty neat. So I'm like, sure, I'd love to play. And we were using there's a separate system called the Star Wars role-playing game system, which, but funny enough, was first published by West End Games and then acquired by Wizards of the Coast in the early 2000s. So they published a version of it called the Saga Edition, which is basically D&D 3.5 edition, but you know, with the serial numbers filed off and changed into Star Wars flavor. So that's the system that I first learned and played in, and I was like immediately hooked because it was just super fun. I loved playing a character in that, and so we played through a campaign over the course of like a semester, and then the following semester, that friend of mine who ran the game, he had become too busy with schoolwork that he could no longer run it, and I kind of stepped up to the plate and ran a campaign with including him as a player and a bunch of other students as players, and it was nerve-wracking and frightening, but entirely fun at the same time. So it was just very kinky, and
it's the best kind of kink. It's exciting and scary at the same time. Yes.
Yeah, we were playing in person, and I, at that point, this had become like my special interest, and I was fully engaged in it. I had bought like a lot of Star Wars miniatures off of eBay, so I had like this big bag just full of them, these little plastic miniatures, and I bought a huge pad of 1-inch grid paper that I would like draw the maps on with like marker, and then I would just like plop it down on the table. We would like borrow a conference room for like a few hours, and I would just like plop it down and then like had the miniatures on there. When like the polar vortex hit Chicago a few years ago, we were like in the middle of the campaign.
Right.
So we did a complete remote session I had a laptop up with like Skype on it, and everybody was in that call, and I had my a webcam on like a tiny little tripod as like the visual for it, and I just had this grid paper out, and I would like move the webcam so that everybody could see like what was going on, and they would like tell me where to move their miniature, and it was wild. But that was kind of my first hook into it, and I loved it.
Yeah.
At that time, I was still in touch with Max, and he was running a online campaign with proper Dungeons and Dragons, 5th edition. So I became a player in that game, and we're still playing with that group together. So it's been like 6 years, 5-6 years with that same group of players. We're like 3 campaigns in.
Holy crap.
And it kind of just ballooned from there. Like, I've played Delta Green, which is a spin-off of Call of Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu is you are not fantasy heroes. You are just average, like, regular people investigating this paranormal nonsense. And it turns out to be this kind of like Lovecraftian horror. And if you don't horrifically die, you are incredibly lucky. And Delta Green, you're playing as like government agents. It's kind of like X-Files, where you are investigating this Lovecraftian paranormal stuff, but you're also trying to like contain it and keep knowledge of it out of the public eye. You're like these off the books kind of black ops kind of characters. And so part of that is dealing with like the tremendous mental and social toll that takes when you're trying to like keep from going insane doing this hugely important work that you can't tell anybody about.
Yeah.
So I played that. I've played the Edge of the Empire system, where it's Star Wars, but to figure out what happens, you basically build up a dice pool where it's a bunch of different weirdly shaped dice, and you roll it all and you add up the successes and failures. And that's really cool to DM for, because like with 5th edition, it's basically you either succeed or fail. With Edge of the Empire, you can succeed, but with a bunch of negative stuff also happening, or you can fail, but with some positive benefits from it. And it's very loosey-goosey with the rules, but it lets you kind of flow and be like, oh yeah, like you kind of fail at this task, but you gain some kind of benefit that helps you out. Or yeah, you succeed, but there's some drawbacks, and it kind of like ratchets up the tension even further. It's extremely narrative, that kind of game. So if you're thinking about like D&D, but the rules are like way too complicated, there are far simpler rule systems out there, let me assure you.
Yeah.
You don't have to play D&D, as fun and flexible as it is. And I landed on Star Wars 5th edition, which is a fan-made conversion of the 5th edition rules for D&D into Star Wars, but they rework a lot of stuff to try to fix what are like common flaws with the D&D 5th edition system. And it's like all free. It's all on a very nicely maintained website out there. And I'm actually just finished a 4-year campaign in that system. We're about to start a new one. So yeah, once I got the taste of it, I'm like, more please. And
Instead of
player, I've been a DM, and yeah.
Instead of Dungeons and Dragons, do they call that Sarlacc pits and Rancors, or?
Yeah, like
Close enough. Close enough.
Yeah. Now, Josh.
So
is
yeah,
only-
there
Josh,
really
how many
is
times have you
like.
played? Josh, how many times have you played in the Red 5 Tavern?
Played? Oh, okay. I wasn't sure what you were talking about.
No, that's not what I meant.
Daily. No. Yeah, I've only actually played with you guys on one stream, and I really enjoyed it. But at the time, I was just so fresh and new that I really couldn't get my head around what it was that I was doing. And honestly, just our discussion tonight has actually helped tremendously. And I did actually have a question for you, Aaron. Like,
yeah,
what's your preference? Do you prefer to play, or do you prefer to be the DM?
And then I have a follow-up question to that, which is...
I mean, like I kind of alluded to earlier, I think in some ways there's a distinction and separation between the DM and the player. And I think part of that's good, because if the DM's the storyteller, there needs to be a respect coming from the players that the story that they're telling, the DM has the final say in. And there is kind of a deference to that. And it's weird because like in a kink context, I'm actually like more of a sub, but like a DM is kind of more of a dominant thing.
Yeah.
So it's strange. But as a player, I enjoy going along for the ride, and there are ways that I try to contribute to the story that are informed by my experience as a DM. For example, like if it's pretty obvious that the DM is putting out like a plot hook, like I'm gonna go for it. If there's like the classic example is like going through a door. Your typical D&D party is going to be super paranoid about like what could be behind that door, and like is it trapped? Like what if it's the wrong door? What if it's an illusion? Oh my god! I'm going to be the player who's like, I'm going through that fucking door. I don't care what's on the other side. Because
So you're like, Raj, I'm gonna go right in and then spring a trap.
So I'm like,
It's
I
blown
have,
up.
and this isn't always true, but I usually I have enough trust in the DM to be like, there's something fun on the other side of that door. It might mean that I get hurt. It might mean some setbacks, but it's in service of a larger story that we can all share together. So I'm gonna be like, yeah, I'm going for it.
While it's not comedy, you have to think of D&D in terms of like improv, you know, where one of the basic rules of improv is to always say yes, and so, you know, you kind of have to treat D&D a little, obviously, yes, you want to be strategic about it. There is strategy behind everything that you do, and you don't want to just be gung-ho about and just rush in, but at the same point, you don't want to hinder yourself or the game by just completely saying, no, I don't want to do this, no, I don't want to do this, no, I don't want to do this. So yeah, if there is a door and you can tell that the DM is leading, go ahead, peek behind that door, see what that's going to lead to, because that's going to progress the story.
It's very reactionary, I think.
Yeah, it's about, and that's kind of why I said earlier why I consider like the DM to be a player too, and the experience that you're making is a collective one that everybody has a responsibility to contribute to. I really believe in that, because you are creating this space for creativity to happen and the unknown to happen. And that's really the juice of D&D that you're going after. Any tabletop game, really.
Yeah.
For sure. So for that purpose, people bring up improv a lot, and the kind of wisdom that you can get from that, where instead of saying no to stuff, you say like yes and. So in improv, you have like the setup to a scene, and it's kind of understood that with your scene partners, you're not going to try to negate or deny things that they add to the scene. You're going to try to say, yes, that, and you build on top of that. And I think generally that's good advice, especially because, like I was when I was beginning to DM, the tendency is to be, I'm going to create my world and tell my story, and these players are along for the ride. And it's a bad mentality to have as a DM, because you're not creating that open space for something extraordinary to happen. You're closing it off. So generally, yes and is good advice. There are times when no, but is also a good approach. For example, if as a DM you're trying to like set the tone for a scene and someone kind of like undercuts it with like a dick joke or something, there are times to be like, no, that didn't happen. Or like, no, your character wouldn't do that. Or so there have been times when I've had to say no before as a DM.
Dicks are not a joke.
Too. But generally, yes, yes, and is a good approach to take, and there is a lot of crossover between like theater nerds and RPG nerds, because a lot of what you are doing is kind of active improv storytelling.
It is.
There's no script that you're playing out. It's a TV episode that you're all writing together in real time, and that's why it's so hard to compare this hobby to any other, and that's why I think it's the most fun you can have with your brain.
Right. Now, my follow-up question to what Josh had asked was, which is why I asked, you know, how many times he's played doing the Red 5 Tavern. He's done it once. I've already done it, you know, quite a few times, but that's all we know is basically doing it on a stream, because, you know, we all live in different places. We have, you know, luckily the luxury of technology where we can still play, but how different is it playing like this cross country through technology versus actually physically playing the game together in the same room with the board? Like, what's that experience been like for you?
I mean, part of me wants to go full boomer and be like, you know, in person's the best. And I do think there are some qualities to playing in person that you don't get otherwise. being able to share space with everybody else in the room and be able to read body language and facial cues. There's just something to that video technology just can't quite replicate, and
Yeah.
I do firmly believe in that. However, there are also a lot of upsides to doing an online or streaming game that you're not going to get elsewhere. One of the software programs that I use to run my games is called Foundry, and it is a virtual tabletop where you get a grid. I could put any image that I want on it that shows like the map of what's happening. All the players get different tokens.
That's cool.
And it is specifically programmed. There's a module for it that follows all the rules of D&D 5th edition. So, you can add Eldritch Blast and Smite and a +1 longsword to your character, and it will automate all of the math for you. So you click a button, you say, I want to Eldritch Blast that enemy, and
slut.
it will know.
Yeah.
I
heard
will know
slut,
all your.
but yeah, it's
Oh
fine.
my god. You can Eldritch Slut that enemy, and it will
Slut the hell out
add
of
all
it.
the modifiers for you and do all the math, and it will just roll the dice for you.
Roll a
There's a lot of
D20 for
utility.
slutty. Yeah.
Poor Aaron.
There's a lot of
Sorry.
there's a lot of utility to that I really like, and it will like track hit points for you. So that part of my brain is like, I really love online stuff because I can keep combat moving. And it's just very different when I'm running it for Red 5, where we don't have that. We have theater of the mind. I have to rely more on descriptors of what everybody sees and where they are at, and I have to mentally keep track of that. And I don't have like a handy like hit point meter that I can move up or down for different enemies. I have to like track that on paper.
Right.
So there's trade-offs to both. I think the ultimate way to do it would be to have one of those like fancy tables that people have built with like a touch screen TV in it, where you can like move your miniature on it, but you also get access to all that like rules automation that you have. So it kind of plays out more like a video game. That would be the best of both worlds. But I'm also grateful for the technology that allows us to play online, because without that, I wouldn't have been able to run the 4-year Star Wars campaign that I've been able to run with the people that I have. It allows people to connect in ways that they wouldn't be able to otherwise. And normally the trade-off with technology is that it's faster, cheaper, more convenient, and it's worse. And I think in some ways that's true for the hobby, but also it's been what's been able to make it as popular as it has been, that people are able to find people to play with online and connect and play in ways that they haven't been able to. Like, I'm thinking of players who are disabled or otherwise medically at risk, that playing in person just wouldn't be feasible for them.
Yeah,
but
it definitely
playing
doesn't
online, they're able to.
discriminate. Yeah, it definitely doesn't discriminate.
None at
Literally
all.
anyone can play.
It kind of provides a world for everyone to live the life that they want to a certain extent.
It's definitely, I would say, to, an outlet. It definitely can be an outlet. I mean, I know there have definitely been times where even I'm like, oh my God, it's been such a rough week at work. And sometimes I'm not in the mood, obviously, because even though D&D is fun, there's still obviously a level of thought to it. So sometimes I'm so burnt out from the week at work. But then there are other times, and, I know Kelly could, will back me up on this, but then there are times where it's like, oh my God, this is going to be so therapeutic to play. Like, I need this tonight. I need my friends. I need to kill something within the game. You know what I mean? So it definitely serves a purpose in that way.
It's a good release.
It is a good release.
Yes. Speaking of which,
we're really
there's
gonna
a
get
huge
to the factor of this.
We'll get there. There's a huge social benefit to D&D as a hobby as well, because it simply requires other people to play with, but it also, in this day and age, we've kind of lost this kind of regular rhythmic running into people and spending time in the same place
Yes.
with other people. And D&D kind of gives that structure to be able to say, hey, let's meet every week or every other week, or in the case of my Star Wars campaign, once a month, and be like,
Right.
we're just going to get together and we're going to spend 4 hours plus just talking to each other, which is very weird. And especially if you run one-on-one D&D like I've had before, when's the last time you just sat with someone across the table or even online and just had a conversation with them for 4 hours? It's very weird. And to anyone who's not played D&D, that might sound really weird. Like, how can you spend 4 hours doing this crap when, like, watching a 2-hour movie is a chore? I assure you, when you're in it, the time flies.
You're in it. Oh, yeah.
It really does. And as you're creating this space for creativity to happen, everybody gives of themselves a little bit when they add to that and when they contribute to that creative space. And it, in some ways, it gets very personal. I'm not going to say that like tabletop RPGs can, like, you know, give you better eyesight to cure baldness. It'll cure everything. It's not like that. It can do that. It can make you more empathetic. But it's not a guarantee. But there are times when that happens, when people really place personal parts of themselves into that space, and it can be very healing and therapeutic. My character I mentioned earlier, Baltazar, who's this kind of like Egyptian Anubis dogman thing. He is a Echo Knight subclass, who's a fighter Echo Knight subclass. And one of the conceits of that is you can make like this ghostly image of yourself on the battlefield who kind of like occupies another space, and you can attack from your position or their position. And I came up with this like interesting story about these twins who, you know, one of them was killed in a tragic series of events, but they were both kind of like training to be these kind of like martial warriors within this very strict hierarchical society. And I took the kind of Egyptian theme to it, where, you know, if she died a dishonorable death, then his sister would end up, you know, being this kind of mindless mummy thing. And so he like cremated her body instead. And something to do with that means that she can like appear as a ghost, but like she can't talk or anything. And that's kind of the second image. So it's like brother and sister fighting on the battlefield, like the ice climbers from like Super Smash Brothers. And so it just kind of ran with that story, and it turned into this thing where like I also wanted to bring like religion into it, because to me personally, like, it's a little weird that in D&D, if you're playing a religious character, you're going to be like a cleric or a paladin.
Right.
And I thought, why can't like a fighter be religious? Like, they don't have to get like a mechanical benefit from it, but wouldn't that be neat? And Amonkhet has like really interesting gods where it's like 5 of them, and they're like huge, but they just like walk among their people and they like defend their city from any harm that comes to them. And so I had my character Baltazar kind of have an uneasy relationship with his gods, where after he's kind of cast out from their society, he's like, well, I believe in my gods, but like the people suck. And I didn't intend it to be, but it kind of ended up mirroring my own kind of like deconstruction from my Christian faith and rebuilding it into something like more sophisticated and nuanced. And that ended up being like reflected in Baltazar, where he's like, there's this whole plot line where he ends up revealing that everybody in his city who apparently was like happy-go-lucky and under the protection of their gods, like, oops, they're all actually undead and nobody knows it. And there's this whole scheme going on to like keep everything the status quo. And he ended up revealing all of that. And so he's undead now, but at least it's the truth. And it kind of reflected my own kind of like spiritual journey, as far as like reimagining and re-understanding what faith looks like in a kind of complicated world that we have. And I'm so grateful for my buddy Max for putting that kind of story together. I don't even know if he knew like what was going on with me, or it just kind of happened that way. But D&D gives you that kind of creative space where if everybody's kind of like giving of themselves into it, then it's going to draw out these kinds of experiences that you play through that you can't really get in any like video game or movie or anything. It's just this completely different thing. I don't know how else to describe
And
it.
honestly, I mean, for someone like me who wanted to get into acting, I mean, if for anyone who doesn't know, acting isn't always just about absorbing that character. Every actor always tries to bring a little piece of themselves to the character that
Mhm.
they're playing. And it's the same thing with D&D. The first character that I had was actually created for me. I don't know how you feel about it, but I can tell you once I took over and created Princess Sprinkles myself, honestly, I found that I understood the game a lot better. And she is definitely has personality traits of me. She's completely fucking crazy. And
Yeah.
there's definitely elements of myself in Princess Sprinkles. And I actually find that to be a much better way to go about it. Like, create your own
Mm.
character. It helps you to get more familiarized with what they can do, what they can't do. It's their limitations. So it's been very interesting. It's been quite the education. I really
I'm
recommend
sure.
that people try and play it.
I'm sure that ownership really, makes the character, an extension of yourself to a certain bit,
Yeah,
and
that's why
it
she's a
really,
hand puppet.
It really
She's
does.
literally an extension of myself.
Yeah.
you just like sticking your
and-
hand up her skirt. That's okay.
Yeah, it's absolutely
Make us-
valid to have like a pre-generated character or play a character that someone else makes for you. Like, that's totally fine. And for some people, the value that they get out of D&D is what I call like beer and pretzels D&D, where you just kind of like want to show up and hack and slash, kill monsters, and it's kind of like a stress relief, an outlet, and that is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I just go for the orgy.
But yeah, making your own character and being able to flex that creative side of yourself into what you make, I think is super, super important. I think, and at the same time, I think it's natural for most new players to make a character that's basically them plus plus.
Right.
It's kind of like an ideal versions of themselves.
Mhm.
And again, there's nothing wrong with that. You can have a lot of fun doing that. But if you're in the hobby long enough, like I've been, you end up making characters that, or you might try making a character that's very different than you. And
I was going to
something
ask you
unique
if that's
about that.
something that you like to do. Yeah.
Yeah. There's once you do that, a key aspect of role playing is that you are playing a role. You are pretending that you're someone that you're not. And it could be a power fantasy where you're this, capable hero in ways that you're not in real life. But it also gives you an opportunity to exercise empathy and see different points of view from a character's perspective that you might not otherwise encounter. And
Right.
I have talked to adults in real life who have told me in person that they don't like to read books or anything like that because they don't like thinking the thoughts of another person.
Mhm.
And they consider that weakness, which is mind-boggling to me. But
What?
empathy, in other
surprising.
words.
Yeah.
You'd be shocked how common that is. But D&D does
unfortunate.
give you that opportunity to make a character that's very different than you, like a
Right.
different gender or different background than you, and it prompts you to ask yourself these questions like, what would it be like to grow up without parents, or to grow up really poor, to grow up really rich, to grow up really advantaged? What would it look like to grow up irreligious or religious? And what kind of story possibilities arise out of that? And
Right.
again, not saying that D&D is this kind of like panacea, this cure-all for everything,
Mhm.
but there is value there in being able to step into the shoes of someone very different than you and thinking about how would they think about the world. And that often comes to play in role-playing with D&D, where sometimes you have to make decisions that you yourself wouldn't make, but your character would make. Whether it could be acts of bravery and heroism or acts of cowardice. And that can prompt you to ask questions about yourself, like what actually is important in life to me? Why does my character value this, but I don't?
Right.
Or
right.
vice versa. And yeah, it's it certainly caused me to reconsider some things in my own life as far as like, what do I find important? What do I think is good about the world? There's a lot of possibilities there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Oh, go ahead.
I was actually thinking, like, I was talking the other day. I don't know if you were in the green room when it happened, but like, I was actually thinking of creating another character for myself that is kind of, sorry, honey, modeled and based off of Conan O'Brien. So now I want to create a male character. I'm sorry. Don't be jealous of Conan.
Oh no, he's gone. Oh my
He
god.
gets so jealous. Conan.
It's whatever.
I'll share with you a little trick. Whenever I want to rip off a character, for like D&D and put him in my game as like an NPC, but I want to kind of disguise where they came from, I'll just flip the gender.
Okay.
You take Han Solo, make him a girl, then like people are far less likely to suspect that it's Han Solo. It's weird. So yeah, make your Conan, flip the gender if you want, and you might be surprised with what you come up with.
No. He's
but
gonna stay
that
a
sounds-
male because
the only Conan is the barbarian.
Made him female. No.
Or keep a male to,
Hey,
you know,
DB.
poke your SO.
Hey, DB.
Unbelievable.
You come to spy on us, buddy.
I've noticed a certain word has been dropped a couple of times talking about D&D. Kinky.
Yes.
It is role-playing.
Oh, it's definitely a fetish.
So that leads me into this clip, which is, I think, very funny. This one's actually this one's a lot shorter, but Amy and Sheldon decide to get a little freaky with the D&D. So we'll discuss after we watch it.
Just puts the
We
D
wouldn't
in
really be playing the
D&D.
game right if we didn't see that through.
Okay.
I lead you to a secluded area where I attempt to remove your leather armor.
Mind you, Sheldon, like, does not have sex. He's, like, not into it.
It comes
But
off.
she is. Oh.
Oh.
Kiss you on the lips.
I kiss you back on the lips as well. I erotically caress your nose.
Keep rolling.
Hey, you guys have been in there for a while. You doing okay?
We're fine, thank you.
Okay, we just want to say we feel really
Go
bad
away,
about.
Sheldon is nibbling on my 14. Yes.
Love
That's
it.
pretty good.
No,
So
I could see
again,
how
like-
that could be a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. And again, they're
Yes.
doing it one-on-one. So there you go. That was a good example of, like, the one-on-one play.
They even have those dice
Yeah.
that have like different positions on the sides, so you can use that.
They have those. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so this came up when you were kind of when I was asking to be on your show, but also you asked me to be on. This is completely anecdotal. I can't like prove it. But in my experience, the kind of
Prove it
Venn
didn't
diagram between like D&D players and like the kink community is just a complete circle. And I was trying to figure out why, like what's going on here. And I have a few theories. I think one of them is alluding back to like the Satanic Panic era. I think D&D definitely was an outsider hobby for a long time, just like the kink community was outsider for a long time. Still kind of is. And yeah, so there's that kind of like shared commiseration that you have between kind of two outsider groups. But also like what I was talking about earlier with this opportunity to practice empathy and creativity. It's if you have like a small closed mind when you're playing D&D, you're probably not going to play at a table for very long because you're going to end up with friction against other players, and if it doesn't ruin the game, then
Friction's important. It
we'll
is.
go there. There's
Aaron
good
is
friction
saying
and bad
all
friction.
the right words.
Yes. just
You'll end
rub
up with some pretty bad friction with other people.
Move it up.
But I think part of it too also is that with D&D you have a lot of rules, and with rules you have structures and expectation, and also with kink there's kind of the common perception that with someone who's like dominant in a power dynamic relationship that the kind of like the dom sets all the rules and the sub has to obey them all. It's not that at all. There has to be a discussion about like what boundaries and limits are okay and acceptable for people and for both sides of the relationship. And
there's only one letter difference between DM and Dom. I'm just throwing that out.
There you go.
50 Shades of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
Exactly. So you have to communicate and come into a consensus about like what's okay and what's not. And that's super
no
important.
candle wax. Yeah.
Exactly.
No ropes.
Yeah, that's super important, and that's actually something that D&D recently has kind of borrowed from the kink community, is the idea of like a session zero, or to be able to have what are called like consent tools, where basically just ways to talk about the game so that everyone is on the same page as far as like what's acceptable in the campaign and what's not. There might be like some tables are super cool with like a really like grim dark fantasy kind of thing where you know, civilians getting killed regularly is kind of like on the line, and this kind of like harsh bleak environment of violence.
Those people need therapy.
Might be well they
That
might,
is therapy.
but also like
That
it's
probably is
fiction.
therapy for
They're
them.
getting their
for 10
therapy,
people.
yeah.
No, that is their therapy.
If
out
that's
those
right for their
fantasies
table, then that's
in
what's
place.
right for their table. But some people might not be cool with that. There might be some players who
Yeah.
are like, I don't want animals getting harmed.
I get that. Yeah.
And so being able to have that discussion up front not only establishes trust, but also kind of like sets the rules for that and the boundaries for that creative space, so that within those boundaries, everyone can be free to express themselves and have a great time. And
Like no butt
strangely
stuff.
enough, that's
yeah.
what kink is about too.
Jesus, honey.
So
Gotta
yeah,
have
there's probably more reasons than that for the crossover, but there absolutely is a lot of crossover. Also,
I
role
think
playing,
everyone
dressing up,
should play.
that sort of thing.
Oh, of course. I mean, I was just gonna say, I mean, this is like,
Elves are hot.
yeah, I mean, this is no different than, you know, when DB's had a day at work and he decides, I'm gonna go play some Call of Duty to, you know, have that gaming therapy. I mean, it really is the same thing, you know?
You said dude.
Yeah.
I did say duty.
Just like there's no link between video game violence and real world violence. There's no link between violence in
I don't
D&D
believe
and
in
actual
I
real
don't
world
believe in that
violence.
either. I'm sorry. I don't. You know how many people play video games on the regular? If there really was a correlation between those two things, this this world would be a lot more violent than it already
Be like
is.
walking through
So
Fortnite
that's
or
so
Grand Theft Auto.
stupid. Yeah, that's so dumb.
Like-
I mean,
like I
someone who
said,
takes
it's
that seriously, they've already got a part loose, unfortunately, in their head. You know.
Yeah.
So.
Like I said, that's why like it's a moral panic that
Mhm.
basically linked to Satanism with D&D.
Yeah.
It's a moral panic that linked video games with violence with Columbine. And once you start to understand like what a moral panic actually looks like, it becomes like a lot easier to spot, and you can kind of understand what it is and realize that it's all bullshit. So this is from a researcher who in 1972 identified like 5 key stages of moral panic.
Okay.
Someone, something, or a group are considered to be a threat to social norms or general community interests.
Okay.
Number 1. Number 2, the threat is depicted as a simple and recognizable form or symbol for easy recognition by the media. 3, the portrayal and information about the form or symbol rouses public concerns, creating an uneasy tension. 4, there's a response from recognized authorities and policymakers to help quell the fear. And 5, the moral panic issues result in societal change. That all happened with D&D. That all happened with video games, with like Doom. And
oh, definitely.
Currently, that is happening with trans people.
Yeah.
And strangely enough, there's also a huge overlap between the LGBTQ community and D&D, again, for those reasons that I listed above, as far as like outsider groups.
Right.
Makes sense. Absolutely.
And
It does. Absolutely.
yeah, it's super easy in D&D to play as a female if you're a male, or vice versa, and be able to maybe explore ideas that it might not be safe in other contexts to explore. So
And
that
I would assume that is also therapeutic, just like what we've already discussed.
Oh yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah.
No,
I don't
exactly,
have
GeForce, exactly what you're saying right there. For I would rather play Call of Duty, Josh.
Just say it.
Duty.
I would rather play
Poop.
that for 3 hours than actually go out there and cause bodily harm to an actual human. You
It
know,
depends
'cause
on the person. I mean,
that's why I say it absolutely depends on the person. But you know, I mean, I've definitely done that. There have been times where I've just been like, you know what? I'm so frustrated. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. I can't watch TV right now. Movies are not doing it for me. Music, forget it. If I cannot listen, if I can't stomach the sound of music, you know that I am really like far gone. And there have been times where I'm like, you know what? Just gonna plug in the Sega and I'll sit there and I'll play Tetris or Columns, whatever it's called. I could sit there and play Columns for 4 hours and not blink.
Yeah.
And I'd rather do that than go, you know, beat some random stranger up on the street, you know, or run
Right.
over some hookers in Grand Theft Auto. Whatever helps, man.
or on the actual street. I mean, that's fine too. Hookers.
Yeah, take their money and run.
I mean,
They get what they get.
better it's pixel people than real people, you know what I mean? But no, that's totally valid. That's a big part of metal music, especially like if you go to live shows and like go to the mosh pits. Like I love mosh pits because it's a huge like stress release, but also it's like the adrenaline of getting into a fight with someone, but nobody gets hurt.
Right,
And
right.
like
There's
D&D,
like
it's hard to
there's an
demonstrate that to someone
understood-
outside, but
There's almost like an understood etiquette there, you know, with the mosh pit. Like, dude, we're just moshing. No need to throw any punches or anything like that. We're just gonna bump
Yeah.
up against each other while we enjoy the same music at this concert. So yeah, I totally get that. Totally get that.
Someone falls down, like everybody backs off, helps them up.
Yeah, and then back
same
to
deal.
moshing. Yeah.
I do want to put like a note of caution that like it's not always appropriate to bring all of your mental and emotional baggage into a D&D session. Like there's times where that could be like too heavy and too inappropriate for that table at that time.
There are
So,
other people
again,
involved, so
Right, exactly. You have to have respect
Yeah.
for everyone else that's there.
Again, I'm not saying this is like a cure-all or anything. There are ways to explore that in a way that creates a compelling story that is fun for everyone involved, even those looking on. So I'm not just putting a carte blanche out there to just bring whatever you're struggling with into your game.
No, please.
It
It
has to be in a context that is
Right.
okay for everyone at the table. And
we'll do a little
I can't
PSA
give any hard
here
rules
right
about
now.
that.
Let's
It
do
is-
a little
it is
PSA
a-
here right now. We definitely are mental health advocates. I myself
Mhm.
suffer, so yes, there are outlets, there are ways to channel that stuff, but please, if you are really feeling that low, please, if you can, go seek help. There's hotlines, there's people that you can call. If you are lucky
Yes.
enough to have good insurance through your job, there's betterhealth.com. There's if you don't feel comfortable going into an actual office, I mean, you can talk to a therapist literally through the phone now. I mean, again, the wonders of technology. So please, like Aaron said, within context, go ahead, but don't lay too much baggage on there either. Yeah, it's definitely not
There
a cure-all. We're
there
not saying it's a
there
cure-all.
there are rules of
Mhm.
etiquette in group therapy, so just remember that.
Right.
Mhm.
And I will say, I'm going to be very careful about how I say this, both with respect to your audience and also with YouTube's
Mhm.
guidelines. There, as we're getting more aware of mental health issues and how to address it, my personal belief is that there is more contributing to mental illness than just mental illness itself, as far as like diagnosable criteria.
Mhm.
There are, particularly with young men, there is a uptick in them eliminating themselves, which
Right.
a lot of them would not fit diagnostic criteria for depression,
Right. Right.
which means that like this is a bigger issue than just mental well-being.
Mhm.
And my personal opinion is that it is a loss of community that
Yeah.
many people are experiencing, and a loss of this kind of like tightly knit social fabric. And that's why, personally, I believe tabletop gaming to be a revolutionary act.
Yeah.
In terms of, I guess, like politically, with the kind of consumeristic, capitalistic culture that we're ensconced in.
Mhm.
There is something very pure about just people gathering around a table, and whatever happens at the table happens, and there's nobody anyone else can do to force copyright on that or try to claim it for themselves or charge it or nickel and dime it. And
Yeah.
especially now that 5e rules are in the Creative Commons, all the much more that you really don't need all that much to get started with D&D, and you don't need
Mhm.
much to be able to just sit at the table and play. And there's something very anarchist about that I really like.
Yeah.
But also at the bare minimum, like even if you're not like working through stuff in regular play of the game, just the fact that you're gathering with other people on a regular basis and you are able to set aside whatever might otherwise try to divide you and just
Mhm.
create this shared narrative experience at the table, there's something really powerful about that. And it's one of the cornerstones to creating a community, I feel, in a very tangible sense of the word.
Yeah.
You might not get involved with the tabletop community as a whole in a
Mhm.
wider sense, but at least, every Tuesday night, you're there with your friends, and you are turning off all other distractions and you are just spending time with each other. That's something that's so undervalued in our
Mhm.
society, I think, today. That and having that there, I think, is such a potent force for good, that it's really hard to overstate how valuable that is.
And you see, you just mentioned we pretty much have mentioned what's the good and the bad of technology. The good thing about it is
Mhm.
that it has allowed us to be able to play this together when we do it every Friday in the Red 5 Tavern, but then the whole reason why, in my personal opinion, society has been breaking down is because of technology. People are walking around with their head in their phone. They're not engaging anymore with people. I am unfortunately have social anxiety, so I don't even without cell phones, I still
Mhm.
don't want to engage with strangers, but that's just
Yeah.
me.
Whoa,
But
whoa.
but take the role playing aspect of D&D out of it, it's no different than sitting around with your family and your friends and fucking playing Monopoly. I mean, there
Yeah.
still is that community aspect, and that's why I was asking earlier, how different is it? Because I only know playing through the stream. I would love if we could get together somehow and play D&D in person, because I think
Yeah.
that would be so much more fun with the physical bodies actually there.
Mhm. Well, I'd like to ask you, how does your social anxiety intersect with D&D? Does it limit it in some ways?
In the
Is
beginning,
it
it did.
enhanced in others?
In the beginning, it did. Again, I told you like my character had been created for me. It was not Princess Sprinkles at all. So that actually made it a little bit more nerve-wracking for me because I had to sit there and learn something that had already been created. So I didn't feel any emotional attachment to that character. And because I was new at it, I was more focused first on the actual rules and the gameplay itself than getting into the theatrics of it. So being on camera, learning how to play, trying to get into the theatrics of it while everyone else was dressed up was very nerve-wracking. But then when I finally decided to completely make my own new character, and I had lovely Kelly helping me learning the app and how to pick the different class and learning the spells and stuff like that, I was like, "You know what?" I was like, "I want a puppet. I feel like this would help with my nervousness because I and not only that, the expense of and I know I probably could find things around my house to dress up in, but this has actually helped a lot with my nerves. I don't feel as nervous anymore playing because I have this. I'm not on screen most of the time. As you've noticed, it's always the hand puppet. And that's actually given me the opportunity to be a little bit more open. So now if I did decide to create another character that was female instead of going to the Conan O'Brien inspired route, then I might finally would want to go ahead and not go the puppet route, and it would finally be me on camera. So, I actually think it's helped. Believe it or not, I think D&D has actually helped me come a little bit more out of my shell. Because even this, what we're doing right now, can still be a little nerve-wracking for me.
I don't believe that for a second.
Why? Why do you say that? This is all very false, people. Like, I think people have this misconception, like, that I'm confident or whatever. I'm not. I'm literally dying on the inside.
I am always nervous before going live for either a Red 5 Tavern stream or just my own damn game
Well,
that's not even being
you
streamed.
saw me in the green room. I was like,
Yeah.
right before going live, like,
White knuckles. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, he gets nervous too. I mean, we all do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious
totally.
with the
This is my
role playing
poker
aspect
face.
of it. With the role playing aspect of it, I've heard from some players that being able to slip into a character is a kind of safety for them, in that they're able to kind of put up this barrier between themselves and everything that's happening, and it can help with their social anxiety, in that they don't feel like it's themselves being put on display and under the microscope, but it's a different character, and there's kind of freedom in that. Is that something that you experience?
See, for me, what I was going to say to that is when it comes to acting, because that's essentially what this is, role playing is just a kind of acting. There is something about, I actually find it easier to act in front of people that I don't know than people that I do
Interesting.
know. So believe it or not, doing this in front of you guys because you do know me, I actually find to be more nerve-wracking. I
Do you
don't know why.
fear the judgment more? Or?
Yes, yes, because you're my peers, you're my closest friends. You know how I
makes
am
sense.
truly behind closed doors. Now you're seeing me put on this metaphorical mask playing this other person, and I find it to be a little hard to slip into that role. If I was on a set with people that I don't normally engage in, that opens the door for me to be whoever I want because you don't know me. So for me, that makes it actually a
Yeah.
lot easier. But because you all know me, it's like, oh, now I'm gonna do this, and they're gonna think I'm such a fucking dork. That's my thought process. Hey, birthday boy.
Oh, the terrifying ordeal of being known.
You know, it's like, I know Kelly. I
Hashtag
know
first world
Charles.
problems.
I know Tia.
Yeah.
I know DB. And it's like, now I'm acting like this total idiot. And I know they're not going to judge me. They're my friend. I know they're not. Not in that way that I'm thinking. Yeah, they'll probably make fun of me. But that comes from my perfectionism also, I just that's
Mm.
why I was so, like, hardcore about, "What are the fucking rules of this game? What are the fucking rules? Because I don't wanna look
Yeah.
stupid, I don't wanna look imperfect. What are the goddamn rules?" That's why Tina and I are always like, "Are we doing this right? We don't wanna seem stupid, we also don't wanna do a timeout on the game, like, we I'm sorry to speak for you, Tina, but I don't wanna ask questions while we're in the middle of the game and
Mm.
streaming. That's the other thing, it's the streaming thing too, like, I
Yeah.
don't I don't wanna break the illusion because people are watching us.
Right. Um, I can absolutely relate as far as like being afraid to put yourself out there with people that
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm.
Like my parents don't know that I play D&D. Um, they know I play the Star Wars game, and I've described it in very um, agnostic language that it is basically would be the same thing as if I would describe D&D, but because it doesn't have that cultural label on it, they're like, oh yeah, that's kind of weird, but fine. But if they knew there was D&D that I was talking about, they would throw a bitch fit.
Yeah.
So I just don't, and it's unfortunate that I have to not show that part of myself to them, but I don't want to have that kind of conflict with them,
Yeah,
and I
I
don't
get
think
that.
it's worth it. Yeah, I can relate to it being whereas normally like I'm on a stream right now with I don't know your audience, but we're talking about D&D and the fact that I'm kinky and all that, and who the fuck cares? Because I'm not going to meet any of them or like, you know. So I
Yeah,
can totally
exactly.
relate.
It's easier, yeah.
As far as like that fear of like perfectionism,
Mhm.
um, I absolutely relate to that too
Yeah,
because
that'll
like
never go
I don't
away.
want I don't want to be a fuck up, and like yeah, that's on my mind whenever I'm running the game. But also like yesterday I fucked up Toll the Dead, which is like one of the most common spells out there,
Mhm.
and I just completely mind farted on how that worked and asked
It
for an attack
happens.
roll when it should have been a saving throw. And
Yeah.
so yeah, give yourself some grace. If you need to ask questions, I'm more than happy to receive those.
Yeah.
And it might feel like you're interrupting the flow of the stream, and that's an unfortunate side effect of streaming the game as opposed to it being like non-streamed, that
Mhm.
there's this additional layer of like, oh, we're performing for an audience.
Right. Right.
But I would say that asking you're trying to give an authentic experience of playing D&D, playing
Mhm.
tabletop games, and part of that is how the fuck do these rules work? Which one's the D8? And asking questions and learning, that is just part of the process. So I don't think you'd be distracting or detracting from the game at all if you have questions that need answering.
Would
Yeah.
you say you learn more from actual gameplay or from, research into the material?
For me, I can tell
Uh
you right now,
Both, yeah.
I've learned more from actually playing than sitting there and just reading or watching a bunch of YouTube videos. Honestly, I tried and I couldn't. For me, it's been the actual gameplay and asking as we kind of go along. I don't know how it's been for you, Aaron, but that's been my experience so far.
it's it's kind of a meme that a bunch of D&D DMs just don't read the rules. And this is mostly an online thing, but there are a lot of questions about like how things work, and it's like if you just read the rules, you would know.
Yeah.
And I'm also the type of person that when I buy a new gadget, I read the manual like
Yeah.
front to back, top to bottom, because like that's just how I process information, and I learn a lot that way. But it is the actually using it that knowledge is then applied, and it can finally click for me like, oh, that's how it all works. And I think the same is true for D&D, which is why it's valuable to be able to stream this kind of stuff, because you could take these rules that are in the abstract and be able to see how it actually applies. And that actually relates to how the D&D rules are written. Even
Mhm.
5th edition, they're still written in a way that kind of assumes that someone else can guide you through it or
Right.
can run the game for you or teach you how to do it. It's not really structured in a way where you could just pick up the book, read it, and know how to run the game. So they're doing like a rewrite of the rules that's supposed to be out in like 2024, which is supposed to fix that. I don't know if they will do it. There's a lot of D&D stuff where they kind of hold on to stuff from the past for no other reason than it's always been there, which I don't want to get into. But yeah, it's all that to say, it is, even if you had perfect understanding of the rules by just reading it, it's kind of impossible to hold them all into your head while you're running the game. So running the game is how you see those rules applied, and that's where you get into weird edge cases where you have to ask like how things work. Right. And I always try to question my assumptions of how things work. And because I learn new stuff all the time, and that's how you learn. So feel free to ask questions.
Great. Oh, thank you, Aaron. And I cannot believe we've been going on this long. This is crazy. Was this is great. No.
Is this like really long for your show?
No, because our 80s one ran 2 hours as well. But no, I hope this has been extremely.
I feel kind of bad. I feel like I've dominated the whole thing.
Don't.
We wanted to know about D&D, so
again, I
want to be a good boy, not a Dom.
You're popping our culture tonight, you know? I mean, we're not always going to know every subject matter that we discuss, which is why we like to have our guests on. So there are some things that we're going to know, and then there's some things that we want to learn from our guests. And for someone like me and Josh that, you know, we're very new to D&D, I think you've provided everyone with a really great education tonight, you know, and I hope that people will come and watch, you know, us play in the Red 5 Tavern on the Red 5 Tavern channel. It's a lot of fun. We've been having a blast. And again, you and Charles have been wonderful DMs. I admire the creativity. I'm kind of like you. I'm more of a sub. Like, I don't think I could ever see myself as a DM. So I would rather just play the game. But Aaron, thank you so much. Now you are not just a DM, you're part of WSTR Media. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, and if you got anything in the pipeline right now?
But before I do that, can I take like 2 minutes? I want to leave. If anyone's listening to this and they want to give D&D a try, I'd like to give like a final kind of word of advice for how to get started. So probably the easiest kind of like all in the box kind of way to get started is Wizards of the Coast publishes a D&D Essentials Kit. It's called either Essentials Kit or Starter Kit. Sorry, I wish I had this ready to go, but it's kind of like a box set. You can get it at like Target or whatever, and it has kind of like a starter adventure for you to run. It has pre-made characters, it has miniatures, it has dice. Is everything that you need to get started. So I would say find like 3 or 4 friends that you want to play with and just go for it. There, again, going back to the perfectionism thing, there might be a lot of fear to getting started, especially if like you're being the DM and you don't know what you're doing. I would just say, to quote Adventure Time, sucking at something is the first step to being really good at something. My first time as a DM, I absolutely sucked, but that's the thing about D&D. You can still really suck and still have a lot of fun. Oh yeah. So sucking is how you learn. So don't be afraid to go for it. There's a lot, and as far as you saying like you couldn't imagine yourself being a DM, I couldn't imagine myself being a DM either at first, but it takes a bit more work than being a player, and it takes a little bit of know-how to get started, but really I think it's more accessible to more people than you would think. I would say give it a try. Even if you end up not liking it, it can give you kind of a perspective as a player that you want to get otherwise. If you want to get started as a DM, there's some good advice in the Essentials Kit or Starter Kit, and look up Matt Colville on YouTube. Probably 80% of everything that I've learned about being a DM has been from that guy. He has a Running the Game series where it's like in like 20 minutes of video, he takes you from like, I want to run D&D tonight to let's actually run D&D right now. The final bit of advice is that the hardest part about D&D is not actually D&D itself, it's scheduling.
Yeah.
Be able to
Oh, yeah.
find a
Getting
time and
everyone
place.
together, yeah.
Red 5
Yeah,
Tavern knows
it's
a little
Such an
bit about that.
extended period, yeah.
Yeah.
By the
if
way,
you can get
you made a
past
big
that
mistake
hurdle,
saying sucking. Keep sucking until you learn.
keep sucking until you're good. Just keep sucking it down. Just keep on sucking.
That is the quote of the stream, people.
Suck your heart out.
You hear that, ladies?
Suck
Keep
it up.
sucking until you learn. Jeez.
So yeah.
Words of
So
wisdom.
leave that for if you want to get started.
And we'll let you practice.
Yeah, you can watch the Red 5 Tavern if you'd like to
Yes,
see an example of
please.
D&D actually being played and like what's possible.
Come watch
There's
the
also other campaigns being streamed like Dimension 20 or Critical Role. Although it's kind of like watching porn where it's like it's very much like a glamorized like view of what D&D can be like and not like what it actually is, because Critical Role, they're all like voice actors, they're all like they're like a multi-million-dollar production studio. It's very much like D&D as like a show, not
Right,
like
right.
Yeah.
actual D&D, I would say. So
nice.
So there's that. I've been Aaron Julian as a guest on the show. I am one of the hosts for WSTR Galactic Public Access. It is a Star Wars podcast. We've been going for over 6 years at this point.
Good for you.
The time this episode is dropping, we're about to drop a 10-year retrospective on Man of Steel, where we talk about Superman and Man of Steel and all that. So if you're a comic books fan, you're going to want to watch that. And yes, it's a Star Wars podcast, but we go across the universe, as we call it, every now and then. So there's that. You can find us at WSTR Media pretty much anywhere. And that's that. So thank you for having me on as a guest. Thank you for letting me pop your culture.
This was
We appreciate it.
wonderful. We really do.
We hope
I'm
it was as
loving
good
this.
for you as it was for us.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
have to
need
get a cigarette after this.
God
damn it.
Jinxies. Oh my god. Well, thank you again. Thank you to everyone in the chat. Just a reminder once again, we will be dropping the audio of this live stream on Apple Podcasts. I'm looking into expanding into Spotify, since people like to use Spotify as well to listen to their podcasts. So again, if there was something that you needed the visual for, head over to our channel on YouTube at Pop My Culture and go ahead and gawk at us.
We're all about the visuals here, people.
We do like to cross promote. So again, check out Red 5 Tavern. I believe Salacious Rum is doing his Lego stream, which normally Josh and I are on, but Josh has been working like a dog. I will not actually be on tomorrow because tomorrow's Father's Day. So I will be spending the day with my dad. So happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. Also, I believe our next stream, if I have the dates correct, our next stream is our 1-year anniversary. So even though we started as Scarif After Dark, still we started this shenanigan fest on July 2nd last year. So our next stream will be July 1st. We are going to make it an open stream. So anyone who wants to come on the show, maybe talk about their favorite moments or what your experiences was like being a guest.
Open mic, open shirt, whatever. Open
Whatever,
pants.
man. Open
It's all
bottle, open container.
No shirt,
whatever
no
you
shoes,
want.
still get service.
No,
So-
we will serve you all.
So we got going, and I want to give a shout out to Steve of Rebel Rock Radio, because since we were mentioning Big Bang Theory, please go check out that episode. Josh and I were both on talking about that, and I will be on this Thursday because we're going to be talking about Office Space, which I absolutely love that movie.
Nice.
So check all of that out. We got a lot of good stuff out there. So guys, hit that like button, subscribe, comment once this is over. Aaron, once again, thank you so much. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their weekend. Love you guys.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank
Stay
you.
sticky.
Stay sticky. Oh, that's another thing. We will be dropping a review of the Flash movie. Oy vey.
Oh no.
We'll
Look
get
out
to
for
that.
that one. We'll be having Joker voice on for that. That
Save-
will not
save it
be a
for the
live
stream.
stream. That will not be a live stream. That'll be a live premiere. So we're recording tomorrow, dropping it on Monday at 8:30 after Sidebar Cantina wraps up. So look out for that. All right, guys. Have a great
Speaking of
evening.
sucking.
Yeah. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.